You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. So, as you guys know, for the past, I don't know how many Mondays it's been now, we've been reviewing pretty much all the films. We've been doing this series called What is Star Wars, where essentially what we do is we started out by talking about, the legacy of Star Wars, what makes Star Wars what it is, and then we began going in and reviewing all the films. And so we did the original trilogy, then the prequels, we did A Force Awakens. Ronaldo says, "Hey, Gungan friends." Hey, Ronaldo. Hey, there's no Gungans in this one. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that was
species keeps changing.
That's right.
I'm surprised we're not porks at this point.
That's true. That actually would be more appropriate. I can't even make it work.
Oh,
I can't do
you
it.
Tried it.
I tried.
I see what you did there.
I tried to do it, but it just didn't work. But yes, we are finally at The Last Jedi. This is the one, guys. This is the one that basically polarized everybody. Everybody pretty much was on board with Star Wars up until this point. And when this film was released, this is the one that just, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. What I think more
divided the franchise.
Well, and it wasn't just dividing it, right? It was because the franchise had always been somewhat, like with the prequels even, right? I mean, there were some people that liked the prequels, some people that said it ruined their childhoods or whatever. Mm-hmm. But this is the first movie that not only did it divide the fans, but it created this unprecedented toxicity that just frankly didn't exist before this film. So I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you had a lot of divisiveness, within the fan base. You had a lot of people who really didn't like the direction that Rian Johnson took this film. And, of course, people are starting to freak out because it's like, okay, is this what... Because, I mean, they liked Force Awakens, but they thought it was too derivative. And remember, these are the first films without George Lucas at the helm. So, at least in the prequels, it's like, well, you really can't argue with the creator in a way. I mean, granted, everybody really didn't like them at first, but then people started to warm up to them a little bit. But they weren't as, especially when you're getting all the familiar characters of, Obi-Wan, Vader, and you're seeing the evolution of Vader. But this was completely different. We got brand new characters. Han Solo is now dead. So now we have Princess Leia and Luke, and we kind of got screwed at the end of Force Awakens with Luke because we didn't get him until like the last shot of the movie. So now we're at this point where, all right, bring on Luke now. Now everybody wants to see Luke Skywalker be the hero that we all hoped him to be. And things started going downhill after that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, look, it's true that there are, I think, elements of this film that definitely contribute to the fact that this is why the fan toxicity, I think, reached an all-time high, because it wasn't like it wasn't there. This is the first time that it reached a level to where it really started to affect the franchise. I mean, before people would have arguments or whatever, and you make a good point. George Lucas was at the helm during the prequels, and at the end of the day, look, it's his vision. Well, I should say they were his films, and he's basically an independent filmmaker. And his attitude was always, well, look, I hope the fans enjoy it, but ultimately I'm making these movies for myself. And if you like them, great. If you don't, go find another franchise. But everybody could accept that because Lucas is the one that created it. I think that when it was handed over, first of all, a lot of people thought that they were going to make the Timothy Zahn trilogy. They're like, well, cool. I mean, they already have episodes 7, 8, and 9 written. They just had to adapt them for like into a screenplay or something. But I think ultimately what happened is that once Disney went their own way, they didn't even use George Lucas's treatments because he had written treatments for episodes 7, 8, and 9. And I think that opened it up a little bit more to to fan criticism. And I agree with you in that sense that that's the case. Now Ronaldo, let me see something here. See his comments, but they're not coming through. They're not coming through.
Well, while you work on that,
yeah, go ahead and keep talking.
I
got to figure out what's going on.
When it comes to The Last Jedi, I think the biggest thing, and if you are anybody who's watched our show for any length of time, especially in the beginning, and Ronaldo just definitely probably includes you because you're like one of our long-standing, devoted fans to our show. You hear Eric and I complain about this, ad nauseum. The lack of planning. Mm-hmm. And that was really like what this boils down to. When they decided to create the sequel trilogy, they didn't have a concise plan on how the series or the trilogy is going to play out. If you have Force Awakens, you have The Last Jedi, and then we had The Rise of Skywalker. You had different directors for all of them, which is fine if that's what you want to do, but everybody has to be on the same page. Everybody has to know what the previous, it's like a relay race, like somebody's passing the baton and everybody has to know what hand to pass the baton to. What happens is in this relay race of films, JJ is he's the pop off. He kicks everything off. Great. He brings everybody back into Star Wars, makes everybody have that nostalgia feeling. There's not a whole lot of CG. It's more practical effects, more real lived in worlds, going to real live locations. So now everybody's getting the feel of the nostalgia of the original trilogy. We bring in some new characters, you introduce them, you kind of give them a little taste of what's to come. He did a phenomenal job. If that was his purpose, and I believe that was the purpose of The Force Awakens, I mean, well done. You really can't complain too much about it. We got to see Han, we got to see Leia, we got to see Chewie, we even got to see Luke, even though it was for like a half a second. But at least we got to see R2 and 3PO. So we got the gang back at some point, even though they weren't all together. We still saw each of the characters. So cool. We all are back. We're here. Now, arguably, this part of the race is really the most critical. It's because when track, it's that the middle, because that's where like people make up a lot of ground or they lose a lot of ground. And that's what puts the pressure on the anchor leg to either a smooth sailing or they really gotta push it to the max because they're the last one. And that's where the Last Jedi falls, and it falls right in the middle. And unfortunately, the baton switch wasn't the best. You kind of had a drop of the baton because they probably thought he was going to pass it to the left hand, and the right hand was out, and there was some miscommunication, obviously. And so now, and it's reflected in the film.
Oh,
when you see this film, it's definitely reflected. And then now the anchor, when we get to Rise of Skywalker, you're here to kind of see like now JJ had to come back at the end to try to kind of salvage.
Well, it's a point that you made, right? I mean, originally it was supposed to be 3 different directors, and then it became essentially 2 because they didn't like the way one of his other films performed or whatever. And that's the biggest problem. But I think the big problem is kind of like what you had said, where it was essentially The Force Awakens was there to reestablish Star Wars in the minds of everybody. It was, okay, we're going to kick off the sequel trilogy. We're going to give people a little bit about what they thought they wanted and basically reestablish not necessarily how everybody was thinking, where it was like a remake of episode 4. I mean, definitely a call back to it. And if you guys want to see more, just go back to our Force Awakens review, because we really go into that in depth. But I will say that it is one of those situations where I think it's very obvious they did not have a plan. And they should have had a plan for this entire trilogy, really. I mean, the fact that it was pretty much JJ established this and then Ryan took it somewhere. Well, now it was so far away. I guess if Colin had been the one and it had been Duel of the Fates, it might have worked a little bit better. Because if you guys haven't seen it, that we did a show on it, actually, where we talked about what episode 9 would have been under Colin Trevorrow because of script leak. And sure, we'll go into that a little bit more when we do The Rise of Skywalker. But that one, I think, lined up a little bit more with what Rian Johnson was trying to do. Whereas JJ came back, and it was almost like he was trying to tie up or almost continue on with episode 7. You know, he ignored a lot of facets of episode 8. And again, it's not like episode 8 didn't have his problems, which of course we're going to get into, but, you know, I mean, I think you're right. I think that lack of plan and everything definitely affected the continuity and just made it disjointed. You know, if you take each film in and of its own, it's not so bad. But when you try to watch them all together, you're in for a wild ride. Ronaldo says, I'm going to blow through all of his comments real quick. He says, I think saying polarize is being kind. Yeah, I agree. Said, I think it's not that it didn't exist. It was always there, but it had a reason to appear. Well, yeah, it probably strengthened the resolve of those who were already toxic against Star Wars. Then he says, they didn't use the treatments, but according to what I read, his version of Luke wasn't so different than Ryan's. Yeah, but it was, if I remember correctly, it wasn't too different, but it was different enough. You know, and I think that even if it had been the same, which it wasn't quite the same, it was similar, though. Number one, I think Lucas would have handled it better, and even if he didn't, it's his character to destroy, if you want to put it like that. Right? I think that people, when you take somebody else's work and you adapt it to in a way they don't like, it's because don't forget, George Lucas really wasn't all that nuts about The Last Jedi either. So that's the issue. They thought the strategy or lack of would work somehow. If you ask, man, I would have wanted Ryan to direct all 3. Honestly, if any of them had directed all 3, it would have been better. Now, you can make the argument about which director do you like better, but sure, because again, it would have been a singular vision. It wouldn't have been choose your own adventure, you know?
Right.
And then he says, excuse me, Ryan had the hardest homework, making the movie that brought back Luke. But if you ask me, Ryan did what he wanted, but he tried to make important connections so it made sense with episode 7. But again, that was it. He had to try to make sense of episode 7. What they should have done was what the High Republic people did. Get in a room and hash out the basic story and then figure out, okay, you, JJ, make episode 7. You're going to start here. It's going to end here. I'll pick it up here, and so on and so forth. And then he says, Duel of the Fates is very much a follow-up to episode 9. He means episode 8. Colin Trevorrow said that he actually talked with Ryan about the story, and that's it. And then he says, but Lucasfilm wanted to forget about episode 8. Well, I can see. Well, let's just get it. I mean, we do have a lot we got to go through on this one. All right, so right away, we get a different kind of an opening in this thing. It was very dark. It was very grim. It didn't follow the usual pattern of the opening of a Star Wars film, but I actually thought that was cool. I liked the fact that it opened in a darker, more sinister way.
Yeah, I think that it was. I think it was an interesting choice. I mean, like instead of having like this big, huge. Well, I can't say that. The dreadnought is like a huge armored like ship, man. I mean, this thing is like massive, and it's like a tank in space, you know. And so I love the
Well,
fact that you see this whole huge cannon thing that it comes out of it, and you see the might of the, because that's the thing, like, okay, well, we last saw the Star Killer base was destroyed, so
mhm.
it's like, okay, well, now what are you gonna do, another one? Or so this dreadnought coming out was like pretty pretty formidable. I mean, when you look at the original trilogy and the Star Destroyers, I mean, we thought those were super impressive, and they are. I mean, but I mean, you see this thing, man,
Well,
it's like a tactical.
all the stuff with the First Order, right? It seems like
Yeah,
that's essentially, we talked about this a little bit with The Force Awakens, but I think it's more obvious now because now, you'll see later we got these like gorilla like AT-ATs, and I mean, everything just seemed to be a little bit more menacing, sinister,
aggressive.
bigger, aggressive. Yeah. I mean, it was just one of those things where absolutely. And, again, this time our heroes, this is almost a little bit of a reverse of episode 4 in a sense. Kind of episode 5, because I guess if you're going to, this being the middle story, like you pointed out, we see once again our heroes are in even more peril, right? Because there's almost like nobody left of the resistance at this point. Hosnian Prime's been destroyed. The New Republic is essentially gone right now, at least the government. And so now you had these resistance fighters, and there's hardly any of them left. I mean, it was like they almost were all on the Falcon in the last one, right? But now you see they got a few capital ships or whatever, and it's like, it almost seems like the First Order caught up to them, and it's like, okay, that's it. We're going to end you right now. And then, of course, we get this whole like Marvel humor thing creeping in, where Poe pretty much flies in. He's like, can I talk to Hux? And it's, he's pretending like he can't hear him. And now I actually thought that, what's his name? Domhnall Gleeson or whatever, the guy that plays Hux.
Mm-hmm.
I thought he actually played this really well. This could have been a lot sillier and more stupid. But the thing that I like is Hux being such an intense guy, it doesn't even occur to him that anybody's messing with him.
Yeah.
And actually,
well, it was more so the reaction of all the other officers, because they kind of picked up what was happening.
Exactly. Yeah.
And they're kind of like trying not to laugh, but at the same time, they're like, you realize that he doesn't get it. He doesn't know that this is happening to him.
I know. Now, here's the funny thing, because Ronaldo says, I'll say, I love this humor. Very funny. See, now for me, Marvel humor, the type of humor that you see in Marvel movies does not work in Star Wars films to me. I mean, there's elements of it. There's some things where it's a similar thing, but Marvel humor is really going more for the on the nose, obvious laugh, whereas Star Wars humor is more situational and organic. It's the kind of humor that would come up in everyday conversation, which of course Hux does later.
Yeah, I mean, I did find it funny. I mean, don't get me wrong, and I wasn't expecting that type of humor. I will admit, it didn't stop it from being funny, but it didn't. It did kind of feel out of place for a Star Wars movie.
That's it. It was just really out of place. It kind of took you out of it. I mean, again, though, it sort of fits the characters, I guess. Like, that is something that Poe would probably do.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of like you're trying to differentiate these characters from who they're kind of proceeding. So Poe is kind of like the Han Solo of this new band, right?
Mm-hmm.
We all know Han to be cocky, arrogant, sarcastic at times, but Poe is like almost like a younger version of that, like almost a Generation Z version of that. So he's kind of a little bit more snotty about it, and then Hux is pretty much he plays the role of Tarkin in this, really. He's kind of like the
Yeah.
Tarkin of the First Order. And while he's super high strung, Tarkin had a very calm demeanor because he had age, wisdom, and experience on his side that allowed him to move in that way. Hux is a young guy. He's trying to make his impression. He's battling with Kylo. We'll get into that as far as, as far as control of things. So he's very high strung. So, and that's what I love about this First Order is that they're not as calm as the Empire was. The Empire, you're dealing with seasoned veterans, who really know their stuff. You got Palpatine at the helm. You've got Tarkin, who's like a decorated, strategist and war hero for the Republic. You had Vader, who's had tons of experience and training from not only from the light side, but also from the dark. And then you juxtapose that to Kylo, who's like this young punk kid, basically, who has a bunch of talent,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not refined. And that's where these guys are. The First Order has a lot of talent, but they're not refined. And that kind of opens the gateway for this type of humor in a way, but it still didn't quite feel like Star Wars.
Right, and I would even go as far as to say it's like it's dysfunctional, right? Because, like you said, you have Palpatine, Vader, Tarkin. Here you have Snoke, Kylo, Hux. The First Order version is a lot more dysfunctional. So yeah,
Right.
but overall, I agree. I mean, it wasn't like it wasn't funny. It was out of place, and it just didn't. It's not as funny as the type of traditional humor that you see in Star Wars. That's where Lucas really comes off strong as a writer, as does Lawrence Kasdan, all those guys. They really understand that. And of course, Poe, naturally, this is going to bring up another theme that is going to run through this entire film. And a lot of people honestly overlook this. They overlook that a good chunk of this movie is about Poe learning to be a leader.
Mm-hmm.
This is really about him transitioning from being a hero, like a hero fighter pilot or whatever, into being a true leader. And right now, Poe thinks that leadership is like taking chances and, I'm going to go in and do what nobody else would because I can. And here is the first example where, Leia is basically
Mm-hmm.
like, no, pull back, retreat. And he's like, no, I think I got this. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the seeds to that whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, it puts Leia in a different light. I mean, we've seen Leia kind of take charge, but now she's really the face of this new,
She's the Mon Mothma now, yeah.
yeah, she's Mon Mothma now, and you can tell like she has a different type of gravitas about her. She's not, in some like she's not ready to jump into a fight, obviously, because she's like 70 years old, but but Leia still has that. I mean, look at her. I mean, she still has that fight in her. You see it, but there's wisdom that comes with that, though,
Right.
and
Well,
and that's what Poe has to learn.
yeah. You have to know when to push and when to pull a little bit. But of course, Poe engages anyway. And again, I
Right.
mean, so in this scene, overall, I thought it was cool. There were some things that obviously eventually, I don't know. And I purposely, by the way, because, and even on this channel goes all the way back to when we were just doing audio podcasts. And I remember our second episode ever was a review of this movie. And I'd almost be interested at some point to go back and listen to what I said about it back then compared to what I'm saying about it now. Because one of the things that I have noticed is I'm a little bit lighter on the sequels now. Like, I'm not, there's certain things that still bug me like they did back then, but not as much. And I let them go a little bit, and I can see where they might fit in the story a little bit more. And I'm not going to say I'm not as critical about it, but I'm enjoying it more, I guess.
Yeah, this scene. I mean, one thing I love about this scene was that it was once again shot masterfully. You know, just the way the X-wing kind of rises up against the dreadnought, and then this shot that we're seeing right here, it's giving you the whole Top Gun vibe. I love seeing how Poe is. You really see how masterful of a pilot he is. Just watching him do his thing, and essentially he's taking out all these cannons single-handedly.
Yeah.
Even with TIE fighters flying after him, he's still, I mean, he's really, really that good. So, and that's the thing, is it's kind of like once again, this the theme that you said is constantly going through this film is that because you have talent, that doesn't mean that you have to flex it all the time. Sometimes you have to know when to, like you said, pull back and find another way. And Leia even says that, you can't just jump in the X-Wing every time and just go blow stuff up. I mean,
Exactly. And I mean, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's not just a sort of a leadership like that, but there's also within the character themselves, right? Because even though Leia was young back in the original trilogy and all that, she still had like a wisdom about her. She had experience because she was always in a leadership position. She was like a teenage senator. Whereas Poe has always been the guy that's been following the orders, right? It's like, okay, here's what we need to get done. Go get it done. And so I think in a lot of cases, he thinks that they're just not really thinking, because he does make the point, like, look, this is the only chance we're going to get to do this. So we have to do it. But Leia's point is, yeah, but at the cost of probably like half our fleet or something. So you have to be careful about that. I want to get a couple of these chats from Ronaldo really quick before we move on. He says, I think we all expected Leia to become this type of a leader. And I mean, sure.
Yeah.
Why
It's a
not,
natural
right?
path for her character.
Absolutely. It's pretty much, I think, something that we always knew, even from the original trilogy. And this is even before the prequels came out and pretty much, demonstrated that, or basically showed that her mother was a senator and everything like that, that it's kind of in her blood, He goes, that scene is top 3 space battles for me. Well, that's actually a good point. Let's get to the space battle, because I actually thought the space battle in this was pretty good. I don't know if it would be top 3, though, for me. Because we've been pointing out, actually, a lot of fantastic space battles. Like, a lot of people underestimate the Battle of Scarif. Or even, oh, I keep forgetting the region's name. I had it, though. The one where Maz Kanata's castle is. That was a pretty good one.
Oh, yeah.
Although, if we're just looking at space battles, though, Scarif had a pretty decent one, although you could say that was atmospheric. So I guess I could see this. I mean...
Well, no, I mean, it did take place in space
some
as
of it
well,
did.
though.
Yeah, some of it did.
Yeah.
And it was pretty exciting.
Yeah, I hated the fact that these bombers just were so. That was the thing. It was like so monotonous, kind of waiting for these bombers to arrive. You just like, come on, like hurry up! Like it's the slowest thing in the world. Like, why would you send this up now? Like,
well, here's the thing that's funny about that. How impractical are these things, right?
That's what I'm saying.
You have these slow-moving bombers that are just going at a crawl. And you're thinking, okay, number one, how long does a squadron have to go to protect these things before they get to their target? And how does, like, any Star Destroyer fleet just not shoot these things down immediately? And why would you have bombers? Like, this is something where somebody was high in a writing room and just said, you know what we've never really seen? Now, they do have TIE bombers.
Right.
But see, that makes sense. I don't know these
Well, see,
things.
the thing is, well, yeah, I think once again, it kind of shows you the resources because, you're dealing with the Empire. We saw that, okay, it's the money thing and they can manufacture this stuff. You're dealing with a rebellion. I surmise that they're pretty much either taking other freighters and just modifying them to do what they need them to do. Because I don't think they have the budget to really just
Yeah,
get
but did
what
you
they need
see
to.
how many bombs were in that thing?
Exactly. I know. I
Well,
mean, don't get me
you'd
wrong.
have to have a budget for that, is what I'm saying. I mean, that
Well,
can't be
yeah.
cheap. A TIE bomber's not, I mean, that's just like a little ship. That thing was, I mean, I get what you're saying, though. You're probably right. They probably do repurpose some freighters or whatever. I don't know. That
Well, you
bugged
gotta
me.
cut. You gotta trim the fat some way. And so either you're gonna have, okay, we can get you like 80 bombs we can drop on a single target, or you can have a faster ship, but you can't have both.
Well, I
I
can
think that's
see
kind of
that. Like, that thing would have been a little bit more practical to me to be a planetary bomber. Like you're bombing some city or something. But, I don't know, a
right.
ship? I don't know. Well, you know what?
Exactly.
This is what happens.
Yep.
You
That's
go
what
on a
happens,
slow
man.
moving. And what was funny was it was yet another thing that's repeating in Star Wars all the time. It's very much like in The Phantom Menace when all the astromech droids were picked off one by one, but R2-D2 was the one that was left and he saves the day. It's like all the bombers that went there were pretty much annihilated immediately, right? Like, it was just... And now they all have to pretty much gather around and try to protect this one single, very slow-moving bomber that's that's just going very, very slowly towards its target. Why, I don't know.
You know what this whole scene reminded me of? The final scene in Independence Day with the,
Yes.
when they're like, okay, we got one, and he's like, does anybody have any missiles left? And it's like that. Russell Case, sir. It's just like, okay, it's that one guy that's just like, we got to protect this dude because he's basically our last hope. Otherwise, we're gonna. But then you start seeing like, look, even the guys who were back in the control center, like, look, we're running out of pilots and planes. I mean, we don't have enough to handle this because those bombers are getting picked off left and right. So it's just like, dude, this was not the best plan.
This was not, well, much like... See, this whole scene right here is a microcosm of the sequel trilogy planning.
Exactly. That's very true.
This right here is what was wrong with this entire trilogy. It was basically...
And this is how we all looked.
Yes.
This is how, as fans,
well,
this is how we look.
That's Kathleen Kennedy right there. She's kind of like, all right, I'm just going to like do one kind of thing. All right, but I think Ronaldo's got like let me get his comment up here. Because remember, he loves this film. He says, yeah, they were too slow. I always thought that they weren't built for that specific situation, but they had to use them. And I guess you can make the case that they don't have much left, but again, that's why Leia said, let's pull back and not do this and go another time. And of course, we find out later in the movie, too, that she's always one step ahead of Poe. She always has these plans because she's thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead, where Poe's only reacting to the situation. And that's what I think makes him different. But in this scene, though, we do get a setup, right? Because this is Paige Tico. This is Rose Tico's sister. And of course, Rose is a new character for this film that we're going to meet a little later. Wasn't exactly very well received by the fan base. But
why is that not surprising?
Yeah. But this is basically the catalyst for that whole thing. And again, I mean, I get it, and I think that that's why Leia was saying, look, we don't have the resources for this. We need to pull back. But, of course, Poe did what he did, and then they moved on. All right, so then back, of course, after this whole thing goes, because, Hux is always making these comments that are hilarious to me. Because he'd even said, well, we got like these ships, let's just go ahead and, blast them or whatever. Now, this is the second time that we've seen Snoke, right? Because the first time was in The Force Awakens. Now we see him again. We still don't know his true size yet at this point because he's still got this whole like Wizard of Oz like hologram thing going right now. And the interesting thing about this is he's admonishing Hux and basically calling him out for failing, but he's also demonstrating a little bit of a Vader thing here. Even though he's doing a hologram thing, he's just like using all these crazy force powers, forcing Hux to the ground, dragging him across the floor. I mean, it definitely shows you how powerful this guy is.
All without being there.
All without being there. Yeah. And I have to say that when I first saw this, I thought, okay, all right, this is actually kind of cool.
Well, yeah, when you first see what Snoke is able to do, you're just kind of like, all right, now how powerful is this guy?
Exactly.
Because before when we saw him, we never saw him really do anything. He was just talking to them, to Hux and Kylo. But this time he's actually doing some stuff. And we, like you said, we still hadn't physically seen him yet. But his presence is definitely felt literally because he's dragging Hux all over the bridge of his own ship.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, the whole idea of Snoke too, because again, this is before we find out that Palpatine actually created him in a lab or something. But I mean, this is adding to the mystique, I think, of who is this guy? Because I remember the fan theories are just going insane at this point, right? I mean, there was a whole one thing of, oh, he's Mace Windu. He's, who is Snoke? That was the thing that everybody was talking about around this time. And it never really got answered. I mean, until episode 9, of course. But I mean, at the end of this thing, you still didn't really have a good answer. But you did know, though, after seeing this entire film, that yes, this guy is extremely powerful. And now you understand why everybody's listening to him. This is funny. Ronaldo says, Hux always reminded me of Starscream and Transformers. And he says, I never really believed the idea that Snoke was a giant. It would have felt too silly. Hey, that does not necessarily mean it won't happen in a Star Wars film, guys. You said, I never understood that Mace Windu theory. Look, they were just...
Yeah, I think everybody just wanted him to be back in some way, shape, or form. And...
yeah, it's just, I mean, look, the Mace Windu thing is the one thing that it's kind of a loose end to everybody, right? Like, everybody wishes that Mace would come back because, again, even back before Maul and all these people came back that shouldn't have, you could make the argument that, look, Mace's wounds weren't all that critical, and sure, he was blown out the window of the, I don't know, what was that?
There's the office of...
it was Palpatine's office, the Supreme Chancellor's office or whatever. But he could have used the Force to soften his descent, and, I mean, it's possible. Look, Anakin jumped out of the speeder in there, and he just kind of landed. I mean, it's possible, right? It wasn't super critical. I mean, more than likely, yeah, Mace may have died, but it's really not beyond the realm. And look, after Palpatine comes back, and especially Maul comes back, I mean, come on. Maul was cut in half and fell down a shaft. That's pretty final. But
we thought the same thing about Palpatine.
We thought the same thing about Palpatine, so it's kind of like, look, Mace, all I'm saying is that there's a case to be made for Mace. And I'll show myself out. All right, yes, so now we get everybody's favorite friends, Poe and Finn, back together.
Yeah, Finn wakes up from his coma. Remember, he was kind of like in this old comatose state after his fight with Kylo and on Starkiller Base. And now he's finally awake. Poe's kind of go like, "Oh man, you're awake," and of course, his first question, Finn's first question is, where's Ray?
You know what? If you want to play a really cool drinking game, watch the sequel trilogy, and every time Finn yells Ray or says Ray, I swear the
You'll be drinking
guy,
all day.
he basically, if you just listen, like in The Force Awakens and Rise of Skywalker especially, he just shouts Ray at the top of his lungs all the time. It's hilarious. It's like, really? All right, writers. I guess we're going to do this. And again, the whole thing where he runs out and the thing's still spewing water. It's basically a visual gag.
Yeah.
And it didn't bother me too much. I know some people were really tweaked out about this whole thing, but I was okay with it. But it was good to see these guys back together again. I always thought that Poe and Finn had good chemistry, and I really wish they had gone on some sort of a mission together. I mean, I guess they kind of did in The Rise of Skywalker, but,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this was cool. I mean, once again, it's like they kind of formed their own little bond with each other from The Force Awakens, and now we're kind of seeing the continuation of that. But, of course, for Finn, it's kind of funny because still at the forefront of his mind is he wants to know what's up with Rey. I think he wants to create a stronger bond, if you know what I'm saying, with her. And then,
yeah, she kind of friend zoned him, but he's still, he's still hopeful.
He's still hanging around, make sure,
Yeah.
Hopefully she'll
come
see
around.
the light.
Yep, see the light or the dark in this game. All right. So speaking of which, now we get to the scene that I think really freaked everybody out. Right? This scene just had everybody just up in arms. Because here, at least it wasn't a 3-year wait like it usually is, but here, we're basically reenacting the end of The Force Awakens, right? I mean, Rey is going up. We finally see Luke. And of course, we were all speculating after The Force Awakens on that last scene, like, oh man, she's just holding out the lightsaber and he's kind of looking at it and everything. And we were just imagining, like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen when, he gets it, and is there going to be some sort of exchange? I mean, it was just going to be amazing, right? But much to everybody's surprise, takes the lightsaber, just chucks it over his shoulder. I'll never forget the first time we saw this, everybody's reaction in the theater to this one.
It was like somebody just took the air out of everyone's lungs.
They just gasped. They just absolutely gasped because it was... Look, if Rian Johnson's idea was to surprise the audience, he could not have picked a better thing. I mean, that...
So, that moment, what did you think? I mean, I'll say for myself, when I first saw it in the theater, and I'm like, okay, maybe he did it because he was like, I don't need this one. I already have one, I thought he was going to tell her to keep it, honestly. Like, no, you can have that. That's what I thought initially he was going to have, because he's like, look, I already built a new one. This one is more, the lightsaber doesn't have any more meaning for me anymore, type thing. That's what I thought he was going, but to see him just chuck it, like, heck, like, you didn't know, you didn't know where he was going with it. Like, okay, was he angry that she brought it back to him? Did he throw it away because he's like, look, I'm so powerful, I don't need this anymore? Or was it like, I have my own now? Like what was Luke's frame of mind? Or was like this some sort of test? Like, there's so many different things that you could have, like, at that very moment when he chucked that lightsaber.
I was like, is he going to go down and get it at some point? Was he just making a point?
Yeah, I thought like maybe that's part of her test. Eventually she's going to have to like find it and pull it out the water or something, Well,
because here's the thing. I mean, even if, and obviously he's just disillusioned with the Jedi and he just, but a lot of this, and this is a problem I had, and even Lucas, this is why, look, Mark Hamill himself This is
Mm-hmm.
actually his handle on Twitter, by the way. Mark Hamill actually hated this. I mean, he actually was arguing with Ryan about this whole thing. I mean, there was actually rumors that he was going to quit because he didn't think that this is what Luke... It's not so much that Luke wouldn't have been disillusioned with the Jedi and all this other stuff, but it just doesn't fit quite with his personality. You know, and it's one of those things where I think that they could have handled it a little differently because, again, that was not just his lightsaber, that was his father's lightsaber. And it would be one thing if he had never been redeemed or whatever, but, you know, I mean, Vader turned back into Anakin. So you'd think that that lightsaber would have held even more sentimental value, you know, or to honor the legacy or whatever. You know, that's where it was really kind of strange to me.
I thought it would have been really hilarious. Like, you know how people like lose their wallet and somebody returns it to them, like, hey man, I found your wallet. And it's like, oh, you know, was there any money in it? Or I thought it would have been really hilarious if Luke would have like, you didn't see a hand attached to this thing, did you?
Yeah. Well, don't forget the alternate beginning to, I think it was The Force Awakens, where it was supposed to, or it might have been this movie where it was supposed to, no, it was The Force Awakens. It was going to open with Luke's hand and lightsaber floating in space or something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and everybody thought, oh, that was just some weird rumor. It was actually true.
Yeah.
It was true. So, you know, when he chucked this lightsaber, man, it was like, and the Porg, I thought the Porg were another little adorable.
Yes, they were cute.
They were cute, and they actually did some cute things, and there was some stuff that I didn't think that they really overdid it. There would be the temptation to overdo this, but some actually felt they did. By the time there was a bunch of Porg and the Falcon with Chewie toward the end, you know, they're like, all right, maybe this is going a little bit too far. Let me get some of these things with Ronaldo in. He says, I was shocked with this about chucking the lightsaber. And he still remembers it. And he says, when I saw it, I immediately thought that something was wrong with him, as we all did. Because it was just not the type of reaction you would expect, you know? Then he says, but I remember that at the end of one of the trailers, Luke said it's time for the Jedi to end. So I kind of had a theory that he didn't want to be associated with the Jedi. And that's actually a good point, because the Jedi were, to him, basically a failed organization, right? And we'll get to this a little bit later because he gives his whole speech about it. But it's true that, you know, if he's really all this tweaked out about the Jedi and, you know, okay, it's done, it's over, that makes sense. But still, this guy's a grandmaster, you know? And I mean, even though Yoda ends up, and of course we'll get to that too, he ends up talking to him, it's like, it just seems that even though Luke could get disillusioned, that would be something that I can see. Just the way that it was handled, I think, was a little bit over the top. You know, Luke wouldn't do this.
Well, it's just the fact that we had no context. Like, I could see if there was a movie that showed us where Luke became like, okay, disillusioned with everything, he kind of like walked away like Ahsoka did. Like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Then